Did you know that according to a recent survey, more than 60% of millennials believe that biblical values are not only irrelevant today, but actually harmful? This tension between woke culture and traditional beliefs isn't a coincidence. It's part of a bigger story, one that's less about progress and more about power, control, and rewriting society as we know it. In today's video, we'll explore why woke culture appears to clash with biblical values and uncover the hidden agendas that may be driving this conflict. Woke culture, as we've all come to know, is a movement driven by social awareness and a desire to rectify injustices. On the surface, it's all about fairness, equality, and progress. But the further we dig, the more we start to see a consistent conflict between the core principles of this culture and the foundational values that the Bible has upheld for centuries. From family structures to morality, and even what constitutes truth, the battle lines have been clearly drawn. But why is this happening? And why does it seem that everything the Bible teaches has suddenly become controversial? Today we'll explore the fundamental clash between woke ideology and biblical values, the hidden agendas at play behind this cultural movement, how this conflict affects you, your community, and our future. The first place to start is with the fundamentals. Woke culture is built on a foundation of relative morality, meaning the idea that truth is subjective and can change depending on the situation. In contrast, biblical values have always been about absolutes. There is right, there is wrong, and these standards don't shift because of changing cultural winds. For instance, the Bible's teachings on family and marriage have always emphasized structure. One man, one woman, building a stable home for their children. Woke culture, on the other hand, often champions a do whatever makes you happy approach, valuing personal happiness over structure. Consider this. A recent study by Pew Research found that traditional marriage rates have declined by over 30% in the last 20 years, while cohabitation and alternative family structures are on the rise. Why does this matter? Because this shift reflects a broader cultural move away from biblical definitions of family. The question is, who benefits from this change and why? To understand why woke culture and biblical values are at odds, we need to look at the origins of the woke movement. The term woke originally meant being aware of social injustices, a noble pursuit. But over time, it's been adopted by various political and ideological groups as a tool for reshaping cultural norms. Historical and sociological studies point out that movements like these tend to be driven by a desire to upend existing power structures. Take, for example, the Marxist undertones present in much of today's woke ideology. Karl Marx's ideas were fundamentally about class struggle and dismantling systems of power. Woke culture has taken these concepts and applied them not just to class, but to gender, race, and religion. Biblical values, which uphold ideas of servitude to God, community, and family, are seen as obstacles to the dismantling of these power structures. For instance, several scholars, such as James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose in their book Cynical Theories, argue that Marxist influences have permeated modern social justice movements, providing a framework for understanding the intersectionality and power dynamics promoted by woke culture. Let's look at a real-life case study. In 2019, a small bakery in Colorado made headlines when its owner, a devout Christian, refused to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. The fallout was swift, with social media campaigns, lawsuits, and public outrage labeling him as bigoted and hateful. But beneath this conflict was a deeper question. Should individuals be allowed to act according to their faith in their business dealings, or should they conform to the changing tides of societal norms? This case exemplifies how woke culture often targets individuals who hold to biblical convictions, branding them as intolerant for not conforming to new social standards. It also illustrates how the push for inclusion and tolerance can sometimes become an exercise in excluding those with different beliefs. The agenda here seems to be less about equality and more about enforcing a uniform set of beliefs. Now let's talk about the hidden agenda behind this cultural movement. Many experts argue that woke culture is less about achieving equality and more about control. Consider this. If there is no absolute truth, then truth becomes whatever those in power say it is. This means that institutions, whether political, educational, or corporate, can define morality in whatever way suits their agenda. Historically, we've seen this pattern before. Totalitarian regimes often begin by erasing old values and replacing them with state-approved ideologies. Whether it's the Cultural Revolution in China or the suppression of religious groups in Soviet Russia, one thing remains consistent. Control over what people think and believe is key to maintaining power. In today's world, woke culture is used by some as a tool to silence dissent and enforce a new kind of social conformity, one that leaves little room for biblical values or any form of traditional belief. We spoke with Dr. Emily Richards, a sociologist who has studied cultural movements for over 2 decades. Dr. Richards explains, woke culture presents itself as progressive, but it often ends up being just as dogmatic as the systems it seeks to replace. The attack on biblical values is not random. It's a strategic move to discredit anything that stands in the way of ideological homogeny. Similarly, Reverend David Miller, a prominent Christian leader, pointed out that the reason biblical values are under such heavy attack is because they represent a standard that transcends human authority. When people, or governments, wish to exercise total control, they cannot tolerate a higher power that sets limits on what they can and cannot do. So, what does this mean for us as a society? The erosion of biblical values has real consequences, not just for Christians, but for everyone. Family structures are weakening, with fatherless homes becoming increasingly common. According to data from the US Census Bureau, children from single-parent households are more likely to face challenges in education, employment, and mental health. This isn't to say that non-traditional families cannot thrive. Many do. But there is a tangible cost to the loss of stable, 2-parent households that biblical teachings often emphasize. Another area of concern is the concept of forgiveness. In woke culture, people are often cancelled for past mistakes, with no chance of redemption. Contrast this with biblical teachings, which emphasize forgiveness, grace, and the opportunity for renewal. Without forgiveness, society risks becoming increasingly punitive, where mistakes are met with harsh consequences and no path for reconciliation. Historically, societies that have adhered to some form of absolute moral code, like the biblical 10 Commandments, have been able to provide a clear framework for right and wrong, which in turn fosters stability. Ancient Israel, for example, prospered when it followed its moral code and faced hardship when it did not. Today we can see similar patterns in modern Western society. As adherence to biblical values decreases, we are witnessing an increase in societal fragmentation, mental health issues, and a lack of shared purpose. So, what's the solution? How can we respond to this cultural shift? The first step is awareness. Understanding the underlying motivations behind woke culture helps us see the bigger picture and prevents us from being easily swayed by emotional arguments. We must also be willing to stand up for our beliefs in respectful but firm ways. This might mean having tough conversations, supporting businesses that align with your values, or even just making sure your children understand both sides of these cultural arguments. It's also important to build communities that support these values, whether it's through local churches, study groups, or simply connecting with like-minded people. One of the greatest strengths of woke culture is its community. Christians and supporters of biblical values need to develop their own networks of support to withstand the cultural pressure. The clash between woke culture and biblical values is not just a cultural skirmish, it's a battle for the heart and soul of society. The push against these values is about more than just progress. It's about redefining what is right, what is true, and ultimately, who gets to decide. But you have the power to resist this push. By standing firm in your beliefs, educating yourself and others, and supporting communities that uphold these values, you can make a difference. The question remains, are we going to allow cultural tides to erase the values that have guided humanity for thousands of years, or will we stand as beacons of truth in an age that increasingly shuns it? The choice is yours, and your actions today will shape the future for generations to come. To all our brothers and sisters out there, we see you as part of our family, one that is on a mission to spread the light of Jesus far and wide. By subscribing to our channel and sharing these messages, you're helping us fulfill a divine purpose. Together, we're not just viewers. We're a movement, a community bound by faith and committed to sharing the truth of Christ. Let's grow this family and spread His word until every corner of the world feels His love.